My guest tonight cut a path into the record books by doing things his way. Born the son of a hockey hero, Brett Andrew Hall broke away to establish his own legend as one of the greatest snipers the game has ever seen. He's a two-time Stanley Cup champion, 8-time All-Star, and his 741 goals stands fourth all-time in the history of the National Hockey League. But before he was inducted into hockey's Hall of Fame, did you know he was scared of the ice as a child? Once outran a 250-pound black bear. Took nearly 5,000 shots on goal in the NHL. Tonight, we'll learn what makes this undeniable icon who he is. A man who once said, "Don't worry what people say or what people think, be yourself." Please welcome Hart Trophy winner, Brett Hall.
Thank you.
Did I lie?
You did not.
Well, you know, it's a little bit intimidating to interview a friend. I mean, I don't want to name drop, but I do consider Brett Hall a friend of mine. Would you consider me a friend of yours?
Absolutely.
All right, good. So now that we're on a friend-to-friend basis, you know, it's so cool to get to know more about your history. I'm from St. Louis, so I picked up the Brett Hall story when you came to St. Louis. But, you know, when you go back to your childhood and the way you grew up, just tell me about what life was like around the Hall household as you're the middle of these 5 kids.
It was interesting. You know, like yourself, father away a lot. Obviously road trips, and wasn't afraid to go out and have a good time, which I obviously inherited a little bit of.
So that's genetic?
It's a genetic trait. I've figured that out. You know, so there wasn't a lot of structure. But in that same sense, in that same vein, it taught you how to be independent and to be able to go out on your own. And whether it was you know, just going out and creating some stupid game with your brothers, you know, to pass the time, or as you got older to, when you went away to play junior, there was no trepidation or there wasn't any fear because you'd kind of had a little bit of that already growing up.
It's funny that, you know, I said in the introduction you were scared of the ice when you were a kid. You didn't really love to skate. You didn't like being cold, and yet you're the son of this great NHL icon in Bobby Hull, and your mom was a figure skater in her own right. It's kind of crazy.
It is crazy. It's so young that I don't really remember why.
I mean, we're talking like literally 4, 5, 6 years old.
Right, but I think it stems throughout my whole life. It takes me, you know, when my wife likes me to do things, and I'm like, I don't really, you know, I don't want to do that.
Right.
But then once you get it, I start thinking about it, and we do it, and everything's fine. But I always have a little early hesitation about wanting to do something that I'm not comfortable with, which is probably why I have a real pattern to my life.
Tell me about your dad and your mom, and tell me, you know, what kind of parents you were born to. And, you know, we know that Bobby was traveling a lot, your dad, and your mom was kind of in charge of corralling these crazy kids.
My mom was born and raised around here in Malibu. And so she was kind of well-to-do. My dad was a farmer in Canada, a family of 7 girls and 4 boys, 11 kids with nothing. You know, his favorite line is he never slept alone until he got married. And so, you know, and they started out, and I finally, as I got to be an adult, I finally asked them, like, what they could have possibly been thinking to ever get together in the first place. They're complete polar opposites. You know, my mom loved to spend money, and my dad's the cheapest man alive. So, you know, I got to go places and do things that kids can only dream of. You know, they were wonderful, you know, just like normal parents, just more absent than most parents. You know, we really didn't have any schedule. You know, my mom was just a housewife. My dad was a hockey player, and there was no schedule. They fought a lot, which was, you know, I think there's probably a lot of people here, and there's a lot of dysfunctional families, and it just kind of taught you, you get used to it, which isn't really the way it should be, but you're just, you know.
That's all you know.
Here it goes again. That's when you walk out of the house and come back in a while when it's over.
I read where the Blackhawks had a Christmas party, and Phil Esposito, when you were little, had to basically hold you down with the help of your dad to get skates on your feet so you would get out on the ice.
And then once I did, they couldn't get me off, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
I do find it fascinating that you end up in the NHL as you follow in the footsteps of your father, who was a tough dad. I mean, it was, you know, it wasn't a lovey-dovey kind of a father-son thing here.
Well, you'd get 2 goals, and he'd say, why didn't you get 3? And if you got 3, he'd say, why didn't you get 4, right? So that's just the way it was.
And here he is as an NHL star, and I guess his way of teaching you was just like, hey, just come watch me.
That's exactly the way it was. He was never a teacher. He would always, to all of us, you know, just watch and learn. Or, you know, if someone else was you know, maybe better at what we were thinking, he'd say, watch him. And I guess that's the best way to learn is to mimic.
Did you watch? Were
Oh,
you
absolutely.
interested?
Yeah,
You were
that's
interested.
that's how I learned to shoot. And going back to the skating thing, you know, to this day, you know, even through my, you know, 19 or 20 years in the NHL, I hated skating, but I loved to shoot.
So with whatever's going on with your dad, you're around the rink, what does hockey represent for you? Does it, you know, that's what we kind of like to get at in this show. When does it click for you that, you know, this could be my life?
That is way on down the line.
I mean, so when you're a kid, it is.
I played hockey for the sheer enjoyment of hanging out with my buddies and teammates and playing. To this day, I hate practice. I hate the travel. I hate putting my equipment on. I hate taking the equipment off.
So if you could play all your games at home and have somebody dress you.
Right, but once it was game time and you pulled the jersey on, then it was over, because that's what I lived for. There was nothing more fun than playing games, scoring, you know, having your crowd go berserk, and then taking another team's home fans and completely muting them. I lived for that. I lived for the glory of getting the game-winning goal or the game-tying goal or opening the scoring. I love first goals.
I want to show video from 1977. You're 13 years old, okay? And before we go there, it is friggin', I don't care if you're a hockey fan, doesn't matter. You can look at this 13-year-old boy, and you can see this rifle shot that you've got, and you go, that is not a 13-year-old kid. So let's roll it.
Certainement agir là. Il y a Brett Hall, le garçon de Bobby Hall, qui porte le numéro 11. Devant peu.
Pas menaçant au point de vue précision. Un deuxième lancé de Hull. Arrêté. Minute à faire. Hull qui s'échappe, mais... Dans loin encore. Sur ce lancer de Ken Strong, le numéro 6.
I mean, this is an incredible...
Where did you get that? That's awesome.
It's an incredible tournament because you start thinking about some of the names where Pat LaFontaine was there, Lemieux was there. I mean, these
Darren Pang was there.
Darren Pang was there. These are the best of the best as that age group got older. But, man, you look at that now as a, what are you, 49, 50, 51? How old are you?
52.
52-year-old guy, and you look at a 13-year-old kid, and you tell me,
it looks the same, doesn't it?
It looks the same.
Oh, my God. I couldn't believe that.
That looks the same as this shot that everybody fell in love with. Now, it got a little bit refined from that, and maybe this is a little too technical, but you were a winded-up rifle, blast anything that was in front of you, and it got a little tighter than that as the years went on, right?
Well, that was strictly advice from my dad.
Because that was more your dad's shot.
Yes, absolutely. But he also was smart enough to know, and he told me, he said, you know, the slap shot's great, But when you get to the NHL, there's not going to be that much room. So you're going to have to develop the wrist shot, and you're going to have to be able to score from 15, 20 feet with that wrist shot. And he goes, it doesn't matter how hard you shoot it. It's how quick you get it away.
1978, your parents split, and really your family kind of splits on top of that because you go to Vancouver with your mom and the younger siblings.
Right, and my older brother Blake, but he was at that age where he was only there a short time and then took off.
Bobby's already gone.
Bobby's already gone to play junior. He played with Dale Howardchuk in Cornwall, won a Memorial Cup.
Okay, so I mean, this is for any kid. I mean,
yeah,
divorce is in just about everybody's life.
I was more upset with my brothers leaving than I ever was my parents getting divorced, because that was inevitable and a good thing. I mean, I'm like, oh boy, finally that's over.
But okay, so Penticton.
Penticton.
Explain that to me, because for somebody who grew up in the United States, I don't really understand what that school was.
So in Canada, once you get to a certain age, which is basically 16, you go and play some type of junior. You go play junior A, you go junior A tier 2, junior B. You go somewhere and you go play junior, because that's the next, and you're either scouted by someone or put on someone's list or drafted by a junior team. Nothing, nada, zero. So I had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to play, so I quit.
How old are you?
17. I was 225 pounds, out of shape, beer drinking high school kid. I'd quit hockey.
You're 17 and you're saying, I'm done with hockey.
I was heavy and didn't really give a crap. I just was out there having fun. I like, to me, it was, you're supposed to be having fun, and and I'm sure a lot of people here know that coaches take the fun right out of it. And
you needed to find the right coach.
Right. I'll tell you, when I was sitting at my buddy's place, and my friend Allie Cook tracked me down at his house and said, I talked to these guys, they want to give you a tryout. And so I tried to find my equipment, and I found it and put a bag together, and me and him drove up to Penticton together, which is about 3 hours from Vancouver. It was a neat little town, and so I kind of got my act together and went back into school and caught up on all the school I'd been missing.
While you're at Penticton?
Yeah, playing junior hockey.
So it's hockey and school.
Yeah, and the coach, Rick Kozebak, was the high school gym teacher, and the very, very stern disciplinarian, but fair. And, I didn't know what was going to happen. And there was 109 guys trying out for this team. And so, to pare it down quick, there was no practices. It was just games. And I'd score every game.
Well, you had to, that's right up your alley.
But I had no idea I could do it. And it was then that I all of a sudden learned I could score at will. And it went from being a B player and quitting hockey to all of a sudden, this is the easiest thing I've ever done in my whole life.
I've read where you went from 20th on the roster to Rookie of the Year.
Right. It kind of finally got pared down to about 12 guys for 5 or 6 spots, and the coach just grabbed me and goes, look, I'm keeping you. I see something in you, and I'm going to keep you, but I am going to skate your butt off until you get into shape. And he did, and I worked hard, and I took care of myself and got in shape, and I scored 48 goals and led the team in scoring. And I'm like, what is going on? I am like, this is so weird.
But for us, it's so hard to believe that.
It's unbelievable. It's
hard
a true
to believe
story.
a couple sides of it, that it just clicked.
And honest to God.
It just, okay, so whatever magic dust was sprinkled upon your beautiful golden hair.
Before drug testing.
Before drug, yeah.
I don't know what was in that dust, but it made something happen.
So now that it's clicked, what's in your mind as far as where this can go?
Just before Christmas, I got a letter from Michigan State. And I take it to the coach and I go, what is this all about? And he looks at me like I've got 3 heads, and I'm like, he's like, you're kidding, right? I go, no. And he goes, well, they're thinking about bringing you in and giving you a scholarship to play college hockey. Really? School again? I'm like, oh my God. And so I got in great shape, and I that year I got 105 goals and broke every record.
Wait, how many games roughly? How many games you play?
50 some.
So 50 games, 50 plus games, 105 goals.
105 goals.
So is NHL on your mind?
Now I'm like, okay, I'm going to college. Our junior coach said you can go visit 5 schools, you know, if you had that kind of opportunity. And it kind of still pisses me off to this day that I didn't get to pick the schools. So, because I still was kind of naive. I go, well, you tell me, coach, where should I go? I go, you know more about this than me. You've been a coach here for I don't know how many years. And so he sends me to Michigan Tech, Northern Michigan, Colorado College, North Dakota, and the last school I went to was Duluth.
University of Minnesota, Duluth.
Yeah. I went to Duluth and really fell in love with the town. It's right on the tip of Lake Superior, overlooking the lake. It's just beautiful. And they told me about their program, the skating program, and they had incorporated the U.S. Olympic skating program.
I talked to your coach, Coach Sertich.
Coach Sertich, yeah.
And he said that he was doing things, or they were doing things, that nobody else in the country was doing. It was the Olympic kind of aerobic, anaerobic stuff.
Right. It wasn't like, you know, you hear about, you know, coaches getting mad and they skate the hell out of their team. It was not like that. It was for our own good. It wasn't real hard, but it made you a great
just
skater.
To skate.
Right. It was making you a stronger, better, faster, more powerful skater. And that's the main reason I picked Duluth was because of that skating program, and it helped immensely.
But here's what I love about your coach, Coach Sertich. He told me that he told you at the time, we do not want to sign Bobby Hull's son. We want to sign Brett Hull.
Right.
That had to be, in some ways, music to your ears.
Right. He's a wonderful guy.
Because even in that video, when you're 13, they're speaking French, but the guy's going,
Bobby Hull.
Garçon de Bobby Hull.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what you might as well have on the back, Bobby Hull's son.
Exactly.
Oh, by the way, my name's Brett.
I said, you know, you're only ever going to be Brett Hull. You know, you're never going to be Bobby Hull. And why would you ever want to, you know, he was so great. Let him be Bobby Hull. You be Brett Hull and cast your own shadow while keeping one foot in his, because there's the proud lineage that I have and very proud of who he was. So why not we just make a giant shadow between the two of us?
Unlike any other sport, in hockey, you can be drafted by a team, but unlike, let's say, baseball, where if you go to college, well, now that's kind of washed away. A team will draft you, and they
have your rights.
They have your rights, and you can then go to college or, you know,
right.
go home.
And they still have your rights.
They still have your rights.
Right.
So you're at Penticton,
right.
You get drafted by Calgary, and before you go to Minnesota Duluth, you have this kind of in your pocket, but you want to go to college.
Yeah, and it's no big deal. You know, whenever you're ready to turn pro, or whether there's a certain time limit, like if I leave school and say I'm not signing a deal with, then I would become a free agent.
You're at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and you know all the while the Calgary Flames,
right,
in essence, own your rights.
Exactly.
And so you start with Coach Sertich, and you become a better player.
Absolutely.
Are you still heavy? Are you still out of shape?
No, I'm in good shape, sorta. I'm a shape.
You're in good shape, sorta.
I'm a shape.
You're a shape of a pear.
Well, I'm certainly don't have a six-pack, right?
Okay.
I don't lift weights, but I would, run a little bit. So I was in skating shape. How about that? We'd skate in the summer. You know, notorious slow starter. I have 2 goals at Christmas and end up with 32 and win freshman of the year.
You know, I said in the open, you were chased by a black bear. What?
I don't know. When you said that to me earlier, I'm like, I may look a little distant because I've been thinking about the bear the whole time. And
so you're calling bullshit on that?
Sorta. There was one time when I was under the influence in college.
It's in your book. This is in your book.
No way.
Yes, it is. Have you ever read your book?
Was it in Duluth?
You were with Tonto.
Yeah, Tonto, and we ran out of gas, and we were under the influence, so we were walking up to the corner, Super America, to get some gas, and I think there was like these wood carved, you know, like they do up in the north. They have bears carved of wood, and may have been seeing things and started running. Because I thought we were getting chased by a bear. Let me tell you, it never caught me. And there's no way I was outrunning Tonto either.
Oh, really? I thought the funniest line was, hey, you know, you don't need to outrun the bear, you just need to outrun your friend.
Yeah, and well, I wasn't outrunning him. He's fast, little turd.
So walk me through, it is incredible to think of how you made your NHL debut.
Incredible. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure there's a few guys.
At that stage?
Yeah, so I turned pro after my sophomore year because I was done going to school. I hated school. And so I signed pro. I wasn't ready. I was a little bit ready, but I wasn't totally ready.
So we're talking like May 1986.
Right. Well, we told them we were going to sign. Well, I didn't think I thought, okay, now I'll go to training camp the next. I didn't know they were going to bring me up right then.
Tell the world where you made your NHL debut.
Game 3, the Stanley Cup Finals, Montreal Forum.
That's like making your big league debut in baseball, Game 7 at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
Here's what it looked like.
Currently tonight for the Calgary Flames, the son of Bobby Hull will play for Calgary. It's his first start in the NHL. He's got a rifle-like shot, just like the old man.
Here's Brett Hull. Kind of
flying around again.
That name Hull again.
Yeah, it's been a few years.
Reinhardt at the right point to McInnes across nicely, and Brett Hull is stopped by Patrick Waugh. Brett Hull.
And you can't come any closer to scoring on your first shot on goal than he did. He right off the post back under Patrick Waugh.
The call is by Ken Wilson in there, stopped by Patrick Waugh. What stopped you was the post.
Right. Yeah, he didn't.
Hit the post.
He didn't even move until it hit him in the back.
So the first time you touched the puck, the first shot, was that the first time you touched the puck?
Yeah.
You hit the post.
Right. Had to work on my accuracy.
So, I mean, and this is the Stanley Cup Finals in Montreal at the Forum.
Yeah, and it was awesome.
Okay, so you think, well, obviously the rest of the ride for Brett Hull is easy. I mean, he's
You'd think,
a
and that's the worst part.
A centerpiece of the Calgary Flames going forward.
Calgary Flames.
And that's not the case. You were cut from the roster right after that.
Well, I was sent to the minors.
The next camp.
Yeah, because I was not in good shape.
How frustrated are you? I mean, Terry Crisp is the coach, right?
Oh, my God.
In the minor leagues. And he's wearing you out.
He is the meanest human being I ever met in my life.
Personally or coaching-wise?
Coaching-wise, he's a great guy.
Okay.
But he kicked me off the team, and I'm like, what did I do?
Was there any part
of you?
He goes,
you're having too much fun. Always smiling. I'm like, he goes, there's guys trying to make a living out here. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll act more serious then. And I'm like, okay. And it was the same thing there. I had 2 or 3 goals at Christmas and ended up with 50. First rookie ever to get 50 goals. I wasn't even playing. I'd play like 4 shifts a game.
You had 50 freaking goals, and you're basically having to talk your way into the lineup.
Yeah.
I really want to wrap my head around you back then, and if the frustration of that was at all leading you toward, you know what, screw this.
No. I asked to be traded 100 times. Because first of all, I don't know if any of you know where Moncton, New Brunswick is. It's far away. It's far
From
away.
everything.
It's far away. It's cold. Like I phoned Brian Burke was my agent, and I said, Brian, get me the hell out of here. And he said, just you gotta just stick it out. And I'm like, okay. So we did, and it worked out. And so I made the team next year, and Coach Chris got hired by Calgary.
Yeah, you finally leave the minor leagues, you make the team, and who comes with you?
Right.
Terry Crisp.
And I got traded to St. Louis 52 games later.
You go to St. Louis, now you're pulling off like the Spicoli act here, like you don't care about anything and you're just happy-go-lucky and aw shucks. But there's a fire in there that we're gonna unearth here at some point. But statistically and professionally, that fire was at least in full flame when you got to St. Louis.
There was a small little bunch of kindling that had to spark
little
to
ember.
Right. And walking in to that old barn on Hampton and Oakland was the greatest place I had ever been in my whole life. They built it in 1904 to sell cows for the World's Fair.
For the World's Fair.
Right. You know, we used to have contests every morning to see who had the biggest cockroach in their skates. It was just that's the way it was.
in the upper layer was just like a new ozone of cigarette smoke that just sat up there.
Yeah.
All the banners were stained.
Yeah, from when everyone wore suits and smoking during the games. It was incredible.
So,
it was so electric. It made you want to be better. The atmosphere in there, it made you want to make them go crazy, and it was awesome. And our first series was against the Blackhawks, and I think I got 5 or 6 goals, and we beat them in 5 games. And all of a sudden, it was like, who is this guy? And it was like, and I loved it. I just loved it. It was the greatest feeling I ever had. All of a sudden, it was like people were talking about me, and that was the start of it, and it was awesome.
What happens thereafter is Brian Sutter becomes head coach.
Right.
Who was this tremendous player with the St. Louis Blues. And for what I would think...
Tougher than a night in jail.
Like old school fighter. I mean, he was a guy, the blood dripping down.
And if he wasn't punching you, he didn't like you. It was incredible. Like, we'd sit on the bench, and you'd score a goal, and he'd give you a kidney punch that you'd think you were bleeding through your urine. It'd be like, can you imagine? What would he do if we got scored against?
Right.
It's like, but what a guy.
What a guy, and it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, he let you be you to a certain degree.
He made me be me.
What does that mean?
So the next year was my first full year, like from day one right through. There was no missing games. There's no, you were the guy. And before the season, I went into the media, and they asked me about the season. I said, well, if I don't get 40 goals, I'm going to be really disappointed in my first full year. And my brother, Bobby Jr., called me, and he goes, you can't say that. And I go, why? I go, I believe it. He goes, oh, that's fine, but you can't say it. He goes, what if you don't? I go, well, I'm gonna. And so I got 42 goals. And so
led the team.
And after the season, I'm thinking, okay, everyone has their meetings with the coach, and
on your way out at the end of the year.
And so I go in for my meeting, and I'm thinking, this is gonna be great. Pat's in the back, and you're so good.
Hugs, kisses.
Hugs and kisses. And he MF'd me up and down like I have never been MF'd in my life. He told me how terrible I was, and then turned it around and said, you have no idea how good you can be. You are so incredibly talented, and you could get as many goals as you wanted. And I took it two ways. I could have gone out of there and gone, what a dick, right? But I didn't. I walked out of there and said, God, does he really think that highly of me, that I could be that good?
Is it fair to say that you'd never had anybody really tell you that?
No, they always tell you how bad you are. No one ever tells you how good you are, and that your potential is here and you're only here. And so he goes, your potential is through the roof, and we need you to do that. And I said, okay, and I came back the next year, and I got, it was a contract here too.
Did you have more than 40?
So my first contract was 70,000, 105, 110. And back then, the fourth year was an option year. So the team could go, okay, you sign your option, or you can go, no, I'm going to play out my option, and I'm going to be a free agent. And
in essence, betting on yourself.
Right. And so after 42 goals all summer, we're like, we just want 140,000. And they're like, no, we'll give you 105, 115, something like that. And finally, we just go, screw it. We're playing out the option.
Let's watch a video of highlights.
Hall breakaway at the blue line. A breakaway for Hall going for 50. He scores! Brett Hall has his 50th goal on a breakaway. His 50th of the season.
All right, so that was 50 in 50?
No, that was just my first time ever getting 50.
Okay, so let's...
And that's my dad fake crying up there. I think he got his tear ducts removed when he was a kid. He doesn't cry. Did you see he didn't even know where to wipe? He was like over here. And I scored 72 goals that year. And it was
So where did the price go from your asking of 140 or whatever you said to...
Well, I'll get to that in 1 second, but the guys had so much fun with it all year. Whether it's a home run or a goal, there's always some sort of high five or dance. And ours that year was every time I'd score, the whole bench would go ka-ching. And we used to go, I don't know, Jack Quinn was our president. We'd go, he's spending more money reupholstering that stool he's sitting on every time you score. He just keeps ripping it right off. So from asking for 140, I got 7.2 million over 3 years. And that was, and the Blues were crucified by the rest of the owners.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because when that happens, you pull everybody with you around the NHL. Because you change the salary structure.
Right. Like, there's a lot of 50-goal scorers. You know, they weren't getting quite 70, but they're getting, 45, 50, 55, 60 goals. Bernie Nichols and guys like that. All of a sudden, they're going from getting nothing to all this money too, and it changed the whole landscape of the salary structure in the NHL.
We have this quote on the wall, and we do this with every guest. Your quote is, "Don't worry what people say or what people think. Be yourself." I could kind of tie that into what you just said about your shadow and your dad's shadow. Felt like you did do it your own way. You were loved in the league. I think that's another reason why I didn't lose a tooth. I mean, guys like you.
I would tell all my teammates, don't worry about what people say about you. Be yourself out there. Be your own player, and be true to yourself. Don't read the paper because some guy that's never put on a pair of running shoes in his life says that you've had a bad game. We'll tell you when you had a bad game. You'll know yourself when you had a bad game. Just go out and be yourself. Make your own mark on the game.
So, two things I need to talk to you about. Adam Oates comes to St. Louis. And for anybody who watched hockey, was a hockey fan, what you had with Adam Oates, and it became, Hull and Oates, like Hall and Oates, but it was a combination where it seemed like the two of you could just read each other's mind or body language.
He is right there with Lemieux and Gretzky as the smartest players to ever play the game. so cerebral. You know, he went to RPI, so you can't be a dunce in the first place if you're going to RPI. And he just thinks the game all the time, and we had an instant karma. We had an instant...
Did you know him before he got there?
No, never met him. We had this instant connection that we would hang out, we'd go to lunch, we'd go to dinner, and we would talk hockey. And not like, oh, when I'm over here, I'm going to go here. Like, no, we just talked hockey. And he was one of those guys where, you know, he sat across from me in the dressing room, and in a locker room, there's variances, degrees of intelligence. And you'd get some of the lower species that would say really stupid things. And me and him would just like immediately catch eyes and go, I heard it. You know? And it was just, and it was incredible. And on the ice, it was the same way. And as much as I loved to score goals, it's the greatest thing ever. Well, maybe top 3 greatest things ever. He loved to pass and get assists. And when you have that connection and combination, like no one wanted to be on our line. You know, Jeff Courtnall, who was a damn good player in his own right, he'd come to the bench and he'd go, Adam, didn't you see me? I was wide open. And he'd look at him and go, I saw you. And he's like, well, why didn't you give it to me? He goes, I was waiting for Brett to get open.
That's so great. When I talked to your college coach, he said what people don't realize about Brett is that you were a playmaker too. I don't buy that you didn't love to pass the puck and set somebody else up.
That was another thing. I never wanted anyone to think I was a hog. And so I really worked on my passing because I wanted people to know that I could pass.
And Brian Sutter...
And would pass. There's a total different...
Yeah, a lot of guys can and won't.
Right.
But you did. And there were times where Sutter would put you on penalty kill.
Never. That's why...
Wait.
No, that's...
You never were on the penalty kill.
Ever, or out for an empty net goal. And
with Brian?
With Brian.
Or period?
Or Bob Barry. The record for goals is 92 by Wayne. And the year I got 86 goals, I got 0 empty netters and 0 shorthandeds. And he had, I think, 12. But, you know, he's so great. He goes, hey, he goes, Holly, it's not my fault you weren't good enough to be out there.
But that 86-goal season is only Gretzky's got 2 seasons that are better.
Yeah, he's got an 86, he's got an 87 and a 92.
And then you.
And then me, yeah.
And no empty netters and no shorthanded goals.
No. And it really bothered me because I honestly don't think Brian Sutter even had a clue that I was that close to being able to break the record.
We've talked a lot about individual records, goals, contracts, dollars, adulation. Where on the list of things to do is winning the Stanley Cup?
I didn't really think it was possible. And then, you know, Larry Plow came in as the GM, and that was the end of me in St. Louis. So I'm like, okay. And
not only that, though. Let's back up one step. You had the captaincy taken away from you.
Well, yeah. I deserved it, and I didn't deserve it. But Mike Keenan he was just such a tyrant. This
is 1994.
Yeah, and it was just, you know, there's things you do and there's things you don't do. And Dale Hawerchuk's a Hall of Famer. Probably could be top 100 of all time, like we just had voted in. And his grandmother was dying, and it was going to be, he's from just outside Buffalo. And we were going to play the Sabres, and his grandmother was coming to watch him play for the last time, and Mike Keenan sat him out on purpose. And I snapped on Mike Keenan, and that's when he took my C away. And I was like, you can take it. That's the lowest thing I've ever seen in my life, what you just did to that guy. So
And
they can have it. If that's what that means, then they can have it.
And that really was kind of the beginning.
Yeah.
This kind of fairy tale marriage with Brett Hull and St. Louis just started to unravel.
Well, no, with me in St. Louis, it's never changed.
Not
it was
that.
me and
I
the
mean,
Blues.
in the Blues. Yeah,
absolutely. The only regret I have leaving St. Louis is I didn't tell the truth when I left. I made me look like the bad guy because I loved the fans so much. I wish I would have told them that it was all management that's making me leave because I want to stay.
If it doesn't seem realistic to win the Cup, how badly do you want to win the Cup? Does that make sense?
Well, then I just wanted to ram it on them. And so when I became...
Wait, the fire is lit for you to really go get the Cup.
Right.
When you are exiting St. Louis.
But it's hard. You're a free agent, and you got to figure out, well, what teams have a chance to win? And at that point, it was, Detroit, Colorado, Dallas was kind of coming up hard on Detroit. We thought the Eastern Conference was garbage, except for the Devils, and I'm not playing in that system because I'm not very good defensively. And so we're talking to Chicago. And
do you really want that?
No, I don't want that at all. But, we were about to make our decision, and my agent, Mike Barnett, calls me and says, "You'll never guess who called." And I'm kind of like, it's kind of tired of the games. Who called? I don't want to guess here. And he goes, "The Stars." And I go, "Tell them it's a done deal. I don't care what they want to give me. I'm going." And so I went down there, and it was, here's the missing piece of the puzzle. And I'm like, what?
So now
I wasn't really ready for that, right?
So there's pressure on you as they add this final piece in Brett Hull to bring a Stanley Cup to the Dallas Stars.
Right, and it was great there because I was already friends with Madonna from Team USA, and Guy Carbonneau was teammates with me in St. Louis, and so, Darian Hatcher. There's a whole bunch of guys that I knew on the team, so it was a really great, easy fit.
You finally get there, and you meet Buffalo in the Stanley Cup Finals. I'm wondering what that's like for you because you hadn't been there through all these glorious years in St. Louis.
Well,
you could never get over the hump.
They turned out to be a real solid opponent and very, especially with Dominik Hasek in the net. And, but, I got hurt, tore my MCL in game 3. And so I missed game 4, got a knee brace fitted and came back for game 5 and 6.
So they're in game 6. This game is triple overtime. And here's the end of that Stanley Cup final.
Around the boards for Brett Hull. Hull leads it back for Modano. Modano tied up by Zhitnik. Modano tries to make the play. It's swept away by Schmelik. Led into the net. Hasek down. Loose puck score. It's over. It's over. Brett Hull and Mike Modano were there in overtime. The Dallas Stars are the 1999 Stanley Cup champions.
So,
Goosebumps.
That gives you goosebumps?
Oh, total goosebumps.
What did that feel like? If that video gives you goosebumps, what did that mean to you to win the Stanley Cup?
Everything, because there was guys like Mike Keenan, always said never going to win with Brett Hull, can't win with Brett Hull, and it's like, yeah, because you need more than Brett Hull. You actually have to have other players that are good too, and so and a coach who actually coaches. And so it was like redemption. It was like, oh, really, you can't? And
from this kid that almost quit at 17 because nobody wanted him to play junior, to a Stanley Cup champion and a guy who's scoring 86 goals in a season.
Right, it's crazy. To look back at the start before training camp and they're like, oh, here's a missing piece of the puzzle, and then to get that goal that won it is, it's just another piece of the lore of luck that I've had in my life of hockey.
But what follows this goal, which is
the greatest. I love it.
In the
live
world
in infamy.
We live in a world where everybody's going to now dissect and look in, and your foot was theoretically in that crease that should have disallowed the goal?
No. See, the thing that nobody knows is, and typical NHL, right? They sent out so the rule was, you know, if this is the crease, and Joe, you're over there scoring a goal, and my toe's in the crease over here with nothing to do with the play whatsoever, they would take your goal away. And so the NHL realized, okay, that's really dumb. So, and then like guys with the empty net would skate through the crease and just kind of lay it in the net. No goal because he was in the crease. And so they sent out a letter changing the rule saying if you had possession of the puck, which is also an interpretation, possession, then
it doesn't apply.
Right. And so their interpretation was, well, first of all, since 2,000 people jumped on the ice, they weren't going to say it wasn't a goal. But because you're in possession if you're kicking the puck to yourself, and that's what it did. I kicked that and then shot it in, and my foot went in the crease.
So for all that period of time, they're saying the puck was in your possession because you were able to kick it to your stick.
Right. I'd like to know what that guy was doing. Like, he just goes right through and falls down.
This still goes down as like the or one of the most controversial goals. It's a triple overtime game-winning, cup-clinching goal.
And it's funny, like, I was alive 32 years at that point, and I'd never met anyone from Buffalo. Now I meet one daily.
It wasn't a goal.
They yell in airports. They still. And at first it was mean, and now it's lighthearted now.
It's a crazy ride.
It's crazy.
And it's not over because you end up with the Detroit Red Wings.
Right.
And that, to me, there's nothing like your first, but it seemed like that was a collection of guys that were a little bit older, who all really wanted to just say, I don't care, almost care what you pay me. We're coming to Detroit to win the cup.
Right. And I mean, if you look at it, I think by the end of it, there'll be almost 14, possibly 15 Hall of Famers on that team.
Let's take a look at some playoff highlights before the final.
And here's a break. Brett Hull in alone. Hull down, scores. Eisenman can turn a moving shot. Save made. Rebound, score. Brett Hull. Shot, save made. Rebound, Hull, score. Pass comes through the middle. That's Brett Hall's 100th playoff goal.
I mean, those are great to watch. A couple things in those highlights. One, we saw your mom.
Yeah.
Two, I saw you beat a team that had a blue note on the chest. You beat St. Louis on your way to that cup.
They were a good team. We took 6 games to beat them. They had a bunch of guys, Dougie Waite and Big Walt Kachuk. And
by that point, were you past
the
bitterness?
There was really no bitterness because I loved the city. You know, really cut me hard when I first came back. They booed me, and I'm like, what did I do?
Right.
You know. And now you get these guys come back who never did a thing, and they give them standing ovations. And
but so, you do, in fairness, there is now a Brett Hull statue outside the arena,
which is unbelievable. And the street, Brett Hull Way.
Brett Hull Way.
Yeah. So it's incredible.
So in that season with Detroit, we saw all those goals. And I'm just wondering, you know, you said the first one was like a blur. Now you're in the finals again. What was that like getting back to that depth in the playoffs?
It was great because it was, you know, in Dallas we were the #1 line, and it was, you know, the pressure was on for us to be able to go out and contribute and win games. In Detroit, we were Pavel and I and Boyd were the third line. You had Fedorov and Yzerman, and you had Shanahan and the grind line, and then it was us. But it was weird. I think we carried the load offensively, You know, we got a lot of big goals. You saw the one where I tipped that in. That was game 3. And we end up winning that in double overtime. But I scored that with 40 seconds left. I tipped that in to tie the game 1-1. Or we go down 2-1 in the series with another home game for Carolina.
Here's how it ended.
Is that what's left of the season for the Hurricanes? Fans chanting, "We want the cup." And the game is over.
The Detroit Red Wings win the Stanley Cup. The cup is back in Hockey Town.
This is the oldest team ever to win the Stanley Cup in terms of average age.
So in 2002, you score your 700th goal in the NHL, which is not one more than your dad, but it's kind of the next benchmark up from where your dad was in his NHL career. I mean, that's a lot of goals between the Hull boys.
Yeah, 1,351.
1,351 NHL goals, and you know, can you put into perspective what that meant, or what it meant to pass your dad?
Well, that was when I passed my dad. That was kind of surreal. You know, it was kind of bittersweet. You know, if I could have stopped right on his number, I thought that would have been unbelievable. But obviously,
that's how much you revere your father.
Yeah, because it's. I don't know if the right word is feel bad, because he made a lot of money doing it, but he left the Blackhawks in his prime, and he already had 610 goals, and he was only 31, I believe, when he left, and so he had another 10 years in the NHL when it was premium goal scoring time, where he could have had 800, 900 goals.
You're number 4 on the goal scoring list. You're in the NHL Hall of Fame. And as we wind this down, I think back to how we started with the kid that was scared of the ice and didn't like the cold, and then needed to be motivated to get his skates on and go to work. I mean, what an incredible climb that was for you to get to the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's a surreal story. If you could tell a lot of the the real stories without sullying my reputation, it'd be actually a pretty good movie.
I love that laugh. What's next? I mean, I know you're involved with the St. Louis Blues. You're kind of back where it all really kind of started for you. And what's next in your life?
I don't know. We have great local ownership there. I enjoy being back in St. Louis and working with the team. I don't know if it's really working with the team. I mean, I shake hands and kiss babies and
polish your statue.
Yeah, entertain some people during the games up in suites and things.
How do you want to be remembered as a hockey player?
I would like to be remembered as a guy who may have changed the game a little, may have was outspoken enough to get people to open their minds and maybe think about change, and just a guy that like enjoyed playing and tried to entertain the fans as much as he could.
We end this show with questions that are so up your alley.
Love it. Who are they from?
I don't know. They just appear here on this table.
Wow.
This is the first time I've seen these. But we should both have had a bunch of libations if I'm going to ask you these for real. Would you rather be stuck on a broken ski lift or a broken elevator?
Ski lift. I would be suicidal in a elevator.
Oh my God, I'm the opposite of that. You would rather be just dangling over some mountain than in a box in a wherever?
I'll be in a box when I'm dead. I don't want to be in a box when I'm alive.
They liked it.
I can scale down.
You'd work your way down?
Yeah, somehow. Plus, usually if we're skiing, there's other things to do when you're up there.
You could do that in the elevator. Would you rather be able to read minds or send your thoughts to someone else?
Send my thoughts to someone else.
And
Because I
then
don't really care what anyone else is thinking.
Would you rather wrestle a giant hamster or a tiny rhinoceros?
A tiny rhinoceros.
It's just, I like the image. I like the mental image of that.
It'd be like just kind of playing with a pug. Right? With a horn on it. Just put a cork on the end of the horn and you'd be all right.
Where would you find the cork?
I don't know. Out of my wine bottle.
I'll just keep lobbing you softballs.
Thank you.
Here's the last one. Simple question. What makes a great goal scorer?
Well, you have to find the dead space. You can't be where someone else is. You have to find, and it doesn't matter where it is, you have to find the area to score a goal in, and then once you're there, you have to know how to score a goal.
So who we have here is a young man who was born in Canada, who was scared of the ice as a kid, who grew up in his father's shadow and made his own big shadow and became a legend in his own right. Ladies and gentlemen, NHL Hall of Famer, great guy, Brett Hull.
Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. Great job.